Today we have Terence George from the University of Michigan. He's going to tell us about electrical networks and Lagrange and Grassmann.
Yeah, thanks, Pasha. So, yeah, thank you for inviting me. It's nice to be here in person and give a talk in person. So, I'm going to talk about electrical networks and Lagrangian Grassmannians. So, this is based on some work we did with Sunita Chepuri and David Spire, and all of us are at the University of Michigan. So, let me start by defining an electrical network. Oh, do I need to point at a specific place? Okay, this one works, but I'm not able to change the slide.
Oh.
Yeah, then maybe I can use the.
Oh. Wait, oh no, sorry, that's the problem.
Oh,
now
yeah.
you can.
Okay.
It works.
Yeah. Yeah. Sorry about that. Okay. So let me start by defining what an electrical network is. So a circular planar electrical network is a graph embedded in a disk with a bunch of vertices on its boundary that are labeled 1, etc. n clockwise around the disk. So like these points over here. In this case, oh, the labeling is not right. So it should be 1, 2, 3, 4. And with positive real numbers associated to each of the edges. So these numbers A, B, C, D, E, F, they are some positive real numbers. So you should think of this as an electrical circuit where all the components are resistors, and these numbers are telling you the conductances of these resistors. Some notation that we will need later. So a non-crossing partition of the set n, so this stands for 1, etc. n, is a way to partition this set into blocks such that if you take two elements from any two of the blocks, so you take a block, pick two elements, take another block, pick two elements, and you connect them with lines that go through the disk. They must not cross. So you cannot have a part that contains A and C in this case, and another part that contains B and D, because if you try to connect A to C with a line that goes through the disk, then any line from B to D which goes through the disk must cross it. So this is what you're disallowing. And it's well known that the number of these is the Catalan number. So here is an example of a non-crossing partition. So here you have a disk with points around the boundary. And 1, 2, and 5 are in the same part. 3 and 4 are in the same part. 6 is in a part all of its own. So there are 3 parts, 1, 2, 5, 3, 4, and 6. And this is non-crossing, as you can see. And associated to a non-crossing partition is another partition called its Creverus complement. And the way to think of this is in terms of this picture. So imagine you cut out these polygons that correspond to the parts of the first partition. Then you're going to cut your disk into a bunch of pieces. Now you put numbers 1 tilde, 2 tilde, 3 tilde, etc. around the boundary of the disk. Again, I'm sorry, this should be clockwise rather than counterclockwise. So this should actually be 2 tilde, but it's okay for this slide. And the dual partition has blocks that correspond to all these numbers on the boundary, the tilde numbers, that end up in the same piece of the disk when you do this. So in this case, imagine cutting out this triangle over here and this line over here. Then you cut the disk into a bunch of pieces. There's a piece that contains 4 tilde. There's this piece over here that contains 3 tilde and 5 tilde. There's another piece here that contains 2 tilde. And there's one here that contains 1 tilde and 6 tilde. So these are all the, this is the complement partition. And there should be a 2 tilde here. Okay. So there are some statistical mechanical objects that are closely related to electrical networks. So the one that is most commonly associated is a spanning tree. And in our setting, because we have this boundary, we have a variant of the notion of a spanning tree. So these are called groves, and as the name suggests, they're closely related to spanning trees. And here's what they are. So a grove is a subgraph of your electrical network that is that contains every vertex, is acyclic, so both properties that spanning trees have, but a spanning tree would have to be connected. A grove is not required to be connected. So in particular, it's going to be a spanning forest. And it contains some additional information, which is in every connected component of the grove, there must be at least one boundary vertex. So you cannot have connected components of the grove that are floating around in the middle. Everything must be connected to the boundary. So here are two examples of groves on this graph. So this grove has two connected components, this one and this one. And this grove over here has three connected components. There's one that contains the boundary vertices 1 and 2. There's this one that contains the boundary vertex 4. And there's this one that contains the boundary vertex 3. So 3 is an isolated vertex, but it is its own connected component. Now, associated to a grove are two notions. One is its weight. So you associate a weight to it in the same way that you would associate to a weight to a spanning tree. You take the product of conductances of all edges that are in the grove. So in this case, you have A, B, D, E. That's the weight of this grove over here. For this grove, you have weight B, E, F, these three edges. The other notion associated to a grove is a non-crossing partition. So the non-crossing partition is the one defined as follows. All the boundary vertices that are in the same connected component of the grove would be a block of this non-crossing partition. And because these are disjoint connected components, so the partition is going to be non-crossing if you define it this way. Because if you have a crossing, then they can't be two different connected components. Is okay? So if you fix a non-crossing partition, then you can look at all groves that have this particular non-crossing partition associated to it, and you can define a partition function, which is the sum of weights of all groves that has this specific non-crossing partition as its boundary partition. So for example, if you take this simple electrical network over here, these are all the grove partition functions. So let's look at, say, this one, for example. So lambda, where 1, 2, and 3 are all in distinct parts, is going to be A plus B plus C, because there are three groves on this network that have this particular boundary partition. So this vertex in the middle, because each connected component of the grove must be connected to the boundary, this vertex must be connected somewhere to the boundary, and it has to be connected to exactly one of these boundary vertices, because the partition you have is 1, 2, 3. So the only three groves that have this particular partition are the ones that have this edge, and 2 and 3 are separate components, or it has this edge and 1 and 3 are separate components, or it has this edge and 1 and 2 are separate components. These would give you A, B, and C respectively. And similarly, you can write down all the other grove partition functions. And what this gives you is a map from electrical networks with n boundary vertices to a projective space that has dimension Catalan number -1. So how do you get this map? You start with your network. You compute all these grove partition functions as sigma varies over all non-crossing partitions. There are Catalan number many of them, and you projectivize. So you don't take just this vector, you take that vector modulo scaling. So the reason we want to allow scaling is not clear at this point. It's because you have a certain equivalence relation on electrical networks, which only preserves these grove partition functions up to scaling. So it's more natural to consider the projective space than vector space. A partition is not has crossings, then it cannot come from a grove, or like these numbers would be 0, because the way we defined it, all the boundary vertices are going to be in the same block if they are in the same component of the grove, and you can't have two components of a grove that cross, because then they would be the same component. So in this case, yeah. Does the graph depend on the? Say again the question. No, so you have the graph and then the partition is an additional data. Oh, so the question is, what if you take sigma to be non-crossing, right? Yeah, to be crossing. So why do we need non-crossing? So the reason is if you, I mean, here, every partition is non-crossing, so there is no problem. But say you had 4 boundary vertices and you took the partition that was 1, 3 and 2, 4. Then there are no groves with that whose connected components induce that partition on the boundary, because any grove which connects 1 and 2 is going, that connected component is going to cross the one that connects 3 and, I mean, that goes the other way. And if they cross, then they're forced to be the same connected component. So then the partition associated to it would be 1, 2, like all the boundary. Are there other questions? Okay. So there is a slight generalization of the notion of an electrical network, which is due to Thomas Lamb. And when we speak of the space of electrical networks here, we really mean this slightly generalized notion. But for the purposes of this talk, this generalization is not going to be especially important. So you can continue thinking of it in terms of regular electrical networks, as I just mentioned. But here's why you need this generalization. So if you look at the map that we defined earlier, so this map was defined by Thomas Lamb. And so you look at the image of the space of electrical networks in this projective space over here. The image is not going to be closed. So already you can see this in the smallest possible interesting setting where you have 2 boundary vertices. Then there are 2 circular planar electrical networks that could have these 2 boundary vertices. There's the one where 1 and 2 are connected by an edge, and the one where 1 and 2 are not connected by an edge. So the space of electrical networks would be all conductances you could put in either of these 2 graphs. In this case, there are no edges to put conductances on. So this is just a point, the space of electrical networks with this graph. Here you have R greater than 0, where the positive real number tells you the conductance of that edge. Now, let's compute the grove partition functions. If 1 and 2 are in the same connected component, then you must use this edge. So there's a unique grove, and it's the one that uses that edge. So the grove partition function is the conductance of that edge. If 1 and 2 are in distinct parts, then you're not using that edge. So there is one grove that doesn't use that edge. It's the one where 1 is in a component of its own and 2 is in a component of its own. And it has weight 1 because you have an empty product. So the image of these electrical networks would be an R greater than 0 in the projective space. And the image of this electrical network would be the point 0, 1, because if you compute the grove partition function where 1 and 2 have to be in the same component, there are no groves that satisfy this condition, so you have a 0 there. So the image of this is going to be the point 0, 1. So this set is what you would get if you just took the space of electrical networks, but as you see, it is not closed. Its closure contains also this point at infinity over here. So that's the generalization of the notion of an electrical network. You want to think of this edge as having infinite conductance. And when you have an edge of infinite conductance, that's like having these vertices shorted together. So you glue those vertices together, and you get a shape like this, which is called a cactus. So the more general notion that Thomas Lamb introduced is electrical networks on these shapes you get by starting with a bunch of points on the boundary of a disk and gluing some of them together using a non-crossing partition. So you would get shapes that look like cacti. So this is the space we are really talking about. But like I said, you don't lose too much by just thinking of circular planar networks, so you should feel free to keep thinking of it that way. Okay, so here is a construction that starts with an electrical network in a disk, and it produces a bipartite graph with weights in a disk, which I call a dimer model. The dimer model is just a bipartite graph in the disk with weights on it. And so here is the procedure for creating this. So you look at any edge in your network. There's going to be two vertices incident to it and two faces incident to it. And you replace the edge with a cross like this. Each vertex is going to become a white vertex over here. Each face is also going to become a white vertex. And you connect, each edge is going to have a black vertex in its middle, and you connect things according to the incidence. And I should also tell you the rule for associating weights on the new bipartite graph over here. So these two now half edges that came from the original edge would get weight C, and the two new edges that you created would get weight 1. So this is some combinatorial procedure to start with an electrical network in a disk and produce a bipartite graph in a disk. So for example, if you start with this electrical network and you apply this procedure, you're going to get this bipartite graph. So what is the dimer model? The dimer model is the study of perfect matchings or dimer covers on bipartite graphs. So a dimer cover is a subset of the edges of this bipartite graph such that every internal vertex is used in exactly one of the edges, but boundary vertices may or may not be used. So you don't have the same number of black and white vertices, so you couldn't possibly use all the edges. But the ones that are not used must be ones on the boundary. So here are two examples of dimer covers. So this black vertex is paired with this white vertex. This black vertex is paired here, and this black vertex is paired there. All the internal vertices are used, and 1 tilde, 2 tilde, 1 and 3 tilde are not used. Okay. And here's another dimer cover. Now this black vertex is paired there. This black vertex is paired there. This one's paired there. And these 4 boundary vertices are not used. Now, just like we associated weights to groves, you can associate a weight to a dimer cover. In the same way, you take the product of weights of all edges in it. So this dimer cover has weight BC, and this one has weight ABC, AB. And like we associated some boundary data, a non-crossing partition to a grove, there's a boundary that you associate to a dimer cover, which is not the obvious definition. We're going to define this as the subset of boundary vertices that are not used rather than the subset of boundary vertices that are used. And there's a reason for this convention, as we will see. So in this case, the boundary vertices not used are 1, 1 tilde, 2 tilde, 3 tilde. So I put all the tilde ones together and the ones without the tildes. So you have these boundary vertices that are not used. Okay. So if you start with a dimer model in a disk, you can produce an element of the totally non-negative Grassmannian. And so here is, so recall that the Grassmannian is the space of n+1 dimensional subspaces of 2n dimensional space. And it's said to be totally non-negative if all of its Plukha coordinates are non-negative. So the way you associate a Plukha coordinate to a point in the Grassmannian is you can write this n+1 dimensional subspace as the row span of an n+1 cross 2n matrix, and you take maximal minus, those are Plukha coordinates, and the point in the Grassmannian is totally non-negative if all these Plukha coordinates are non-negative. So now, just like we defined grove partition functions, if we choose a subset of the boundary vertices, so there are n of those without tildes and n of those with tildes, and we choose a subset of n+1 of them, we can define a boundary partition function, a dimer partition function, which is the sum over weights of all dimer covers that have this specific boundary. Just like we associated a partition function for groves to the boundary data, now we are doing the same thing for dimers. And the theorem of Postnikov is, or rephrased in the language of dimers, is that these dimer partition functions, if you take this entire vector of dimer partition functions as I and I tilde vary over all n+1 size subsets of 2n, is going to give you the Plukha coordinates of a point in the Grassmannian. And in fact, this is a bijection. There is an equivalence over here that I haven't told you about. But if you quotient out by a certain natural equivalence, then every point in the totally non-negative Grassmannian is going to come from a dimer model. Okay, so this procedure gives you a way to start with a dimer model on 2n vertices and output a point in the totally non-negative Grassmannian. Yes? So the question is there a reason we want to choose n plus 1 dimensional subspaces? Yeah, so the reason is because in this case, it's because we are looking at dimer models that come from electrical networks. And it turns out that the ones that do come from electrical networks always have this difference n minus 1 of black vertices with white vertices. So there's always n plus 1 that are left behind. But in general, like Posnikov's statement is for general dimer models, and there you have, yeah, arbitrary number here like k comma n. Are there other questions? Okay. So a summary of the constructions we have done so far. So the first one was Thomas Lamb's construction, which started with an electrical network, and it produced a point in this Catalan number -1 dimensional projective space by taking Grove partition functions. The second construction was we started with an electrical network, produced a bipartite graph or a dimer model on the disk, and then we used these dimer partition functions to produce a point in the totally non-negative Grassmannian. So if you compose these two, then it gives you a point in the totally non-negative Grassmannian for each electrical network. And on the other hand, we can coordinatize electrical networks using this projective space over here. So the question is there a natural map that goes like this? So the next step is to define what this map is, this dash map over here. So this map is given by the generalized Temperley's bijection. So Temperley defined this for the square lattice. It was generalized by Kenyon, Propp, and Wilson to arbitrary electrical networks. And then the specific version that we are talking about here, where you have the boundary, is due to Thomas Lamb. And here's what it is. So it's a way to start with a grove and produce a dimer cover. So suppose you start with a grove on this network like this. Associated to it is a grove on its planar dual network. So what is the planar dual network? This is a graph whose vertices correspond to faces of the original network. So this network has 3 faces. So there are 3 vertices labeled 1 tilde, 2 tilde, and 3 tilde around the boundary, but you could possibly have interior vertices as well. And the edges of the dual network are in bijection with edges of the original network, and they are sort of orthogonal to it. So if you have 2 faces that are separated by an edge over here, the vertices corresponding to those faces will be joined by an edge in the dual graph. So that's the dual graph. And if you start with a grove over here, which is this component and 3 as an isolated vertex, you can produce a grove on the dual network by using all the dual edges that correspond to edges in the original graph that are not used. So in this case, this edge C over here is not used. So the dual grove is going to contain that edge. These edges with weights A and B are used. So the dual grove does not contain these 2 edges. So in particular, this is 1 tilde as an isolated vertex and this as component. And the non-crossing partition of the dual grove by construction is going to be the Crevarest complement of the original non-crossing partition. Okay, any questions about this? So that's in this case, we will need this to get a bijection with dimers that preserves weights when we. Yeah, always it's going to be 1. So there are 2 natural choices over here. One of them is to choose ones, which is what shows up in Temperley's bijection. Another one which is useful is to choose 1 over C, 1 over A, 1 over B. But yeah, this is the one we need for the bijection. But the other one is also important. So there's one more definition before we can get to the bijection. So a routing I tilde of this pair of grove and dual grove is going to be a choice of boundary vertex in each component of F and each component of F tilde. So by definition of a grove, there must be at least one boundary component, one boundary vertex in each component, but there's possibly several of them, and this routing is a choice of one of them in each component. So once we choose these routes, you can orient all the edges in each connected component of the grove and each connected component of the dual grove towards the root. So now all the edges in your grove are oriented edges, so they're going to be arrows like this. And here's the bijection. So recall that in the procedure for creating a bipartite graph for an electrical network, we do the following. We start with an edge and we produce this cross like this over here. So if you have an edge in the original graph that goes like this, you put the dimer cover that starts at the tail vertex of this edge, and the black vertex of that dimer is the vertex of the edge. And if you have an edge in the dual grove that goes like this, it's the same procedure. Your dimer cover is from the tail to the midpoint of the edge. So this procedure associates to each grove and dual grove a bunch of a dimer cover. So why is this going to be a dimer cover? So notice that each white vertex has to be used because a grove has to be spanning, which means that there is some edge in the grove that is incident to each vertex. And when you orient things towards the root, there's going to be one outgoing edge from each vertex, and that outgoing edge is going to determine which edge is in the dimer cover. So the only ones that are not used, the only white vertices that end up not being used, are the ones from which there are no outgoing edges, and the ones from which there are no outgoing edges are the ones that correspond to the roots. So what this is a bijection between a grove and a dual grove with a choice of routing, a bijection between that data and the data of dimer covers, where the vertices that you don't use in the dimer cover are the vertices in the routing. And why did we choose weights in this way? So notice the weight, we associated weights to the dimer model. These primal edges are going to, so your grove is going to use this edge, which means it contributes a C to it. And the way we associated weights to the dual, to the dimer model, if you use the edge going this way or you use the edge going this way, you get a contribution of C. And the reason we chose one here is because you have ones here. Okay, so this bijection is also weight preserving. The weight of the grove and dual grove that you start out with is going to be the same as the weight of the dimer that you construct. So here is an example. So say we start with this grove over here, and we choose 1, 3, 1 tilde, and 3 tilde as the roots. So you orient all the edges of your grove towards 1, and in this case 3 tilde is a root, so this edge is oriented this way. 1 is a root, so this edge is oriented this way, and this one is oriented that way. So this is the grove dual grove pair with orientations determined by the roots. And then you use the procedure on the previous slide to construct the dimer cover. So you look at the tail of each arrow and take the half edge that starts at the tail and goes to the midpoint. So in this case, this arrow over here gives you this dimer, and this arrow over here gives you this one, and so on. And as you can see, the choice of roots are exactly the ones that end up not being used because they don't have outgoing edges. Okay, so as a consequence, this lets us write each dimer partition function as a sum over grove partition functions. You're going to sum over all groves for which you have this routing, right? The dimer partition function is the sum over all dimers that have this boundary data. And using this bijection, we can rewrite that in terms of groves. So that's the next definition. So a subset I of n and I tilde of n tilde of size n plus 1 is said to be concordant with a pair of a partition and a complement partition if there is exactly one element of I in each part of sigma and exactly one element of I tilde in each part of the complement partition. So this is exactly what you need for I and I tilde to be a valid choice of roots for sigma sigma tilde. You want exactly one root in each component. So that's exactly what this definition is doing. And then the previous observation that you have this weight preserving bijection between dimers and groves tells you that you can write the dimer partition function as a sum over grove partition functions where these are all allowed iterations. So that gives you this map over here, a map from this projective space of dimension Catalan number -1 to this larger projective space, which is the Pluker space of this Grassmannian. And notice that it's a linear map. So this embeds this Catalan number, this smaller projective space as a linear subspace of this larger projective space. And because this diagram commutes, we know two things. We know that if you start with an electrical network, you're going to end up with a point in the totally non-negative Grassmannian. But also, if you start with an electrical network and follow this direction, you're going to end up with a point in the image of this this projective space as a linear subspace of this projective space. So in particular, you're going to end up with something in the intersection, so some slice of the totally non-negative Grassmannian. And Thomas Lamb's main result was that if you take the space of electrical networks, or really cactus networks, the slightly generalized notion, then that space is in bijection with this slice of the Grassmannian. So everything that is both in the totally non-negative Grassmannian and in this linear subspace comes from an electrical network. Okay, any questions about anything? So now I'll talk about the totally non-negative Lagrangian Grassmannian. So what's the goal here? So our goal was to understand what is this linear slice of the Grassmannian. And the answer is it's going to be a certain notion of totally non-negative Lagrangian Grassmannian. So what is the Lagrangian Grassmannian? So consider this Q-symmetric bilinear form over here. So it's some Q-symmetric bilinear form which looks a bit complicated and it has some signs in it. It is not a non-degenerate form. So this is not a symplectic form because symplectic forms have to be non-degenerate by definition. This form is not, it's degenerate, and it has a kernel, a two-dimensional kernel spanned by these vectors. So we say that a point in the Grassmannian, gr n plus 1 to n, is isotropic for this form if for any two points in this subspace X over here, if you take omega x comma y, you're going to get 0. And the Lagrangian Grassmannian associated to this form omega is the space of isotropic subspaces inside gr n plus 1 to n. So it's all subspaces such that for any two vectors you choose in the subspace, if you evaluate those at omega, you're going to get 0. So usually when you talk of Lagrangian Grassmannians, you have in mind something that's half-dimensional. So why are we calling this a Lagrangian Grassmannian? So recall that we have a two-dimensional kernel over here. So if we quotient out this two-dimensional kernel, then we have an honest symplectic form, something that's non-degenerate. And that's going to live on a space of dimension 2n minus 2. Now a 2n minus 2 dimensional space has at most an n minus 1 dimensional subspace that is isotropic. You can have at most half the dimension as the dimension of an isotropic subspace. So if you want to get n plus 1 when you pull back along the quotient map, then you must be putting in both these vectors in the kernel. So when you quotient out, you lose these two vectors in the kernel and you have something that's actually half dimensional. So that's why we are calling it the Lagrangian Grassmannian. And this is called and the totally non-negative Lagrangian Grassmannian is the intersection of this Lagrangian Grassmannian that we just defined with the totally non-negative Grassmannian. So these are all subspaces that are both totally non-negative and isotropic for this specific form over here. Any questions about this? Okay. So let's go back to this commutative, this diagram that we have over here. So we have electrical networks, and if we look at the two ways of getting to the from this side to this side, we see that electrical networks land inside the slice of the totally non-negative Grassmannian with this projective space. And Thomas Lamb's result tells us that this is a bijection. And our main result is that this slice of the totally non-negative Grassmannian over here is exactly the totally non-negative Lagrangian Grassmannian we defined in the previous slide. So it's exactly all subspaces that are both totally non-negative and isotropic for this specific slightly strange symplectic form, almost symplectic form. Okay. So some big picture comments. So there are a lot of notions of totally non-negative Grassmannian that are known at this point. So associated to the dimer model is the totally non-negative Grassmannian. This is what we already saw. But there's another totally non-negative Grassmannian that's associated to the dimer model, and which is sort of dual to this one, and it corresponds to the two types of cluster coordinates, or the two types of cluster varieties. So all we've talked about today is on the cluster X side in the terminology of Fock and Goncharov, and there's also the cluster A side, and generally you have a map from the A side to the X side. So in this case, the totally non-negative Grassmannian we talked about is this one, and the totally non-negative Lagrangian Grassmannian we talked about is the one associated to electrical networks on this side. Now there's also an A side of all this story, and in this case, on the A side for electrical networks, you have a totally non-negative orthogonal Grassmannian, which was defined by Henriques and Speyer in 2007. And there's a third fundamental model in statistical mechanics, which is also associated to the dimer model. So just like we constructed electrical networks as an embedding inside dimer models, there's a third model called the Ising model, which also embeds into the dimer model, for which there's also a similar story. On the X side, there's this totally non-negative orthogonal Grassmannian due to Galashin and Piliavsky. And on the A side, you have another notion of a totally non-negative Lagrangian Grassmannian, which is sort of implicit in a paper of Kenyon and P. Mantle. And so you have a totally non-negative Lagrangian Grassmannian here and one here, and these are not the same. And you have a notion of totally non-negative orthogonal Grassmannian here and one over here, and I'm pretty sure these are not the same either. So it's kind of a mystery how all of these things connect together. So you have a map that goes from here to here, and you should have a map that goes from here to here. It should be some version of the twist map that goes from here to here. Okay, any questions about anything so far? Yeah, total positivity is relevant to this paper because so what they end up doing is they study something called the hexahedron recurrence, and they show that it satisfies a certain Laurent phenomenon. So there is positivity there as well. Yeah, although they don't talk of this Lagrangian Grassmannian at all. Like they talk of symmetric matrices, but that's the same thing as like the big cell of the Lagrangian Grassmannian. So and there's a paper of Sturmfels and some collaborators, which does make this connection with the Lagrangian Grassmannian, and there they explicitly talk about positivity as well on something called Gaussoids. And there's another notion of totally non-negative Lagrangian Grassmannian, which is due to Rachel Karpman. And this one, I'm not sure how it fits into like the general picture. It's also not the same as these ones. So it's a bit of a mystery what this one corresponds to. It corresponds to dimer models with a certain reflection symmetry, but not with these models. So let me see how I'm doing on time. Okay, so I have 10 minutes. So in the remaining 10 minutes, I'll sketch a proof which is different from the one that we wrote down in the paper. The one we wrote down in the paper is a simple linear algebra computation, but it's I would say less enlightening than this one. So the point of view I want to take is one that comes from discrete complex analysis. So associated to electrical networks is a certain difference operator called the discrete Laplacian. It's a discretization of the usual notion of Laplacian. And here's what it's defined to be. So you start with a function on the vertices of the graph, and you apply the Laplacian to it. You get another function on the vertices of the graph, which is defined in this way. And one way to think of what this is if you hold all the vertices of your network at certain potentials, then it's telling you how much current flows into each vertex of your network. And the function is said to be harmonic if it's in the kernel of the Laplacian for all internal vertices of the graph. So another way to think of this is, so if you have a function that's harmonic, it's saying that this expression is 0. But what is this expression? It's saying that the value of the function at a certain vertex is the average of the values of this function for all vertices around it. So it's generalizing, or it's discretizing this mean value property of usual continuous harmonic functions. There is another closely related matrix that is associated to electrical networks, which is like the Laplacian, but it only sees the boundary behavior. And it's called the response matrix. And what this is electrically is, say your network is a black box, and all you can do is plug in batteries at the boundary vertices and measure what current comes out at each of the vertices. The matrix you would create is the response matrix. So what it's doing is, say you hold all the boundary vertices of your network at a certain potential. It's telling you how much current flows out of each boundary vertex when you do this. So this is it's a smaller matrix than the Laplacian, but yeah, which only sees the boundary. And one more notion. So a function g is said to be conjugate harmonic to a harmonic function f if it satisfies this condition, which is saying that, so suppose f is the potential, then f of v1 minus f of v2 is the potential difference across this edge over here. And if you multiply it by the conductance, by Ohm's law, this is how much current is flowing through this edge. So the conjugate harmonic function is defined so that if you go from one dual vertex to another, or in other words, if you go from one phase to another by a simple path, it's telling you how much current is crossing that path. Yeah. Yeah, this is on the dual graph. So it lives, so the vertices of the dual graph are faces of the original network. So this is defined on faces of the network. Okay. So just like you have the Laplacian associated to electrical networks, there is a certain differential operator associated to the dimer model, which is called the Castelline operator. And it is a discretization of the Cauchy-Riemann operator. So something in the kernel of this operator is said to be discrete holomorphic. And the point of all this is that this boundary measurement map of Posnikov, which associates to a dimer model a point in the totally non-negative Grassmannian, one way to think of what that point in the totally non-negative Grassmannian is that it's the space of holomorphic functions on this bipartite graph. except you have to make a change of basis. So this space of holomorphic functions is not positive, but up to a change of basis, this is what the subspace of the graph that corresponds to this point is. And just like you have in the continuous setting, a function is holomorphic if and only if it's of the form f plus ig, where f is a harmonic function and g is a conjugate harmonic function. So this is a discretization of the usual complex analysis notion. So if this one, yeah, so in this case, we are associating an n plus 1 dimensional space to a dimer model. Okay, so more precisely what this is all assignments of numbers to boundary white vertices, such that you can extend that assignment holomorphically to the interior of the graph. That space is so you start with a bipartite graph. That space is the single point. Yeah, that it's going to be an n plus 1 dimensional space, and up to some change of signs, it is exactly the point in the Grassmannian, because it's in the kernel of the Cas-Line matrix, and the Cas-Line matrix has determinants that are these Fluker coordinates that are dimer partition functions. So if you put all of this together, the point associated to an electrical network in the totally non-negative Grassmannian, a way to think of it is as the space of harmonic and conjugate harmonic functions on the graph. And from this point of view, it's very clear why you have this specific symplectic form showing up and why it's isotropic. So recall that we made some change of signs that I didn't say explicitly, but if you keep track of what sign changes we made, the symplectic form becomes this one, which is somewhat nicer than the other one. There are less signs involved. Now, say we start with a point in the totally non-negative Grassmannian associated to an electrical network. By our previous observation, this is a pair of harmonic and conjugate harmonic functions. And now say you have another such point, a different pair of harmonic and conjugate harmonic functions. Then the response matrix, recall, is telling you how much current is flowing out of this vertex I. And by definition of the conjugate harmonic function, the difference of the conjugate harmonic function between these 2 points is keeping track of how much current flows across it, which is exactly how much is flowing out of I. So g of I tilde minus g of I minus 1 tilde, the difference of the conjugate harmonic function between these 2 points, is the response matrix applied to F1. Okay. So now we take the symplectic form, we plug in these 2 points, F1, G1, F2, G2 into it. And just by plugging in, you get this expression over here, F1 of I, G2 of I tilde minus G2 of I minus 1 tilde, and you sum over all I. And this one is the same term, except 1 and 2 are interchanged because the symplectic form is Q-symmetric. And now we use this observation that the difference of this conjugate harmonic function across 2 consecutive boundary vertices is how much current is flowing through the vertex in between, which is L times F1. So this term is L times F2 because we have G2 here. And here you have L F1. So this sum over here is F1 of I times L F2 of I minus the same thing with 1 and 2 interchanged. Which you can write as F1 transpose L F2 minus F2 transpose L F1. And this must be 0 because the response matrix L is a symmetric matrix. And yeah, that's it. That's the proof that you land in the isotropic Grassmannian. Yeah, so that's all I wanted to say. Thank you for coming.